So it was a gesture of solidarity or maybe just securing their new strategic ally?
A bit of both. The French agreed to intervene.
And that decisive moment arrived in April 1734. Who did the French send?
Commander Chevalier de Longueville arrived from Martinique, and he brought a formidable professional force, somewhere between 200 and 400 well-armed French and Swiss troops.
But crucially, this force also included something else.
It did. A specialized corps of free black men who were highly skilled in jungle combat and specialized in maroon hunting. These soldiers know how to track and fight a guerrilla war in the dense Caribbean bush. They were the perfect counter to the Akwamu's tactics.
So the arrival of this professional force marked the decisive turning point. The dynamics of the war must have shifted instantly.
They did. The French forces were systematic and relentless. They didn't rely on static defense. They pursued the rebels continuously, using their superior numbers, specialized knowledge, and heavy firepower,
They drove the Akwamu toward the remote, rugged eastern side of the island.
pushing them back step by step. The rebels, now facing superior tactics, dwindling ammunition, and a relentless professional army, they just couldn't hold out.
By the end of May 1734, the French had essentially cleared the island and restored planter rule.
Yes, though the mopping up operation hunting down the remaining pockets of resistance continued, and it was brutal.
And this is where we come to perhaps the most tragic and powerful statement of defiance in the entire revolt.
Facing overwhelming military defeat and knowing with absolute certainty the brutal punishments outlined in the Gardelin Code that awaited them,
Many Akwamu rebels chose mass, collective suicide.
it was a final, profound act of autonomy, a refusal to grant the Danes the spectacle of torture they so desired.
Choosing a defiant death over being captured, broken on the wheel, or burned alive.
They viewed this final act as maintaining their human dignity and a final political rejection of Danish rule.
And our sources detail several instances of this. Where did these tragic final acts occur?
One of the most famous sites is Ramhead Peak, the sharp, rugged southern tip of the island. 11 freedom fighters committed suicide there. Some accounts suggest they literally jumped to their deaths on the rocks below rather than surrender.
And near Browns Bay, at a place called Mary's Point, a larger group was discovered.
Yes, an additional 24 bodies of fighters were found there following a ritual group suicide. And this group included the leader, Brefu. She died sometime in April or May of 1734.
It was upon the discovery of these bodies that a remarkable piece of history was recorded by a plantation owner.
He wrote down his astonishment. He noted that one of the most effective strategic leaders of the entire rebellion, Brefu, whom none of us knew and whom we assumed to be a man, was actually a woman.
The posthumous discovery of her identity as a key military leader just shattered the European assumption that rebellion and warfare was the exclusive domain of men.
And she is still honored today by islanders as the true Queen of St. John.
For those rebels who were captured, though, there was no mercy.
None. The French and Danish forces engaged in horrific public torture and execution spectacles to make an example of them. Even those who surrendered under promises of clemency were tortured and executed.
What kind of things did they do?
They were publicly burned at the stake, sawed in half, impaled. The French commander, Longueville himself, explicitly stated that he would kill most and send only a remnant to the governor so he could make an example of him.
The goal was maximum psychological impact on the remaining enslaved population.
To crush any thought of future resistance. And the colonial militia continued hunting the last Maroons and rebels through the summer until the rebellion was officially declared suppressed on August 25, 1734.
9 months of almost total disorder.
And in the immediate aftermath, the Danish plantation system was swiftly and effectively restored. Planters returned, the terror regime was firmly reestablished, and records show that sugar production actually flourished in the years that followed.
Which is a chilling testament to the effectiveness of the codified terror the Gardelin Code ushered in.
It is. The trauma of the revolt also prompted institutional changes on the island. The colonial government implemented permanent security infrastructure,
They built a courthouse and a permanent prison in Cruz Bay.
explicitly to centralize military and legal power, to ensure that such a successful insurrection could never be repeated. The security state of St. John became far more robust after 1733.
We should mention the one famous anecdote of loyalty that emerged from all this, which provides a kind of counterpoint. The story of Franz Claassen.
Right. Franz Claassen was a loyal slave of the Van Stel family, the same family attacked by Brefu. Claassen alerted them to the rebellion and helped them escape.
And as a reward,
The Van Stels deeded him the Mary Point estate in 1738, making him the first officially recognized free-colored landowner on St. John. It's a fascinating data point, showing the complex, sometimes contradictory webs of allegiance that existed.
So if we look at the long-term impact, the St. John insurrection served as a crucial precursor, a demonstration of resistance across the entire Caribbean.
The rebels proved that collective organization and strategic strength could make black freedom fighters dominant over their European oppressors, even if it was only for a finite period. That message spread.
And the struggle continued long after 1734. For instance, in 1840, 11 enslaved people escaped from St. John to British-controlled Tortola, where slavery had already been abolished.
They were granted refuge, and ultimately slavery in the Danish West Indies was abolished 114 years after the St. John Revolt.
In 1848. And importantly, it came after a successful, nonviolent mass demonstration on St. Croix, showing an evolution of resistance from armed revolution to mass civil disobedience.
But the memory of 1733, the organization, the military success, even temporary, undoubtedly informed the resolve of those later movements.
To bring this full circle, let's talk about the historical silence that surrounded this incredibly dramatic and sophisticated event for centuries. Why was this 9-month war, where an entire colony was seized, just minimized or forgotten?
For generations, it was systematically overlooked by colonial powers and later historians who focused only on the planter narrative. It was a deliberate effort to perpetuate what historian Richard Bell calls the myth of docile and content servants.
Right, if you're running a system of forced labor, you can't have stories circulating about highly organized, politically sophisticated warriors who successfully captured a colony.
And the story of the Aquama warrior nobles seizing the means of production to establish their own sovereign slaveholding state, it just did not fit that malicious, delusional narrative of contented servitude.
And the primary documents were inaccessible for a long time.
Stored far away in archives in Denmark or the U.S. National Archives, it made them inaccessible to local researchers for decades, so the narrative was inherently skewed toward the planter's perspective. Piecing together the Aquamu side of the story has been a monumental effort for modern scholars.
But that narrative is finally changing thanks to both academic work and local community efforts.
Yes, just recently, in 2022, the U.S. Congress authorized the placement of a commemorative plaque at Ramhead Peak, the site of that collective suicide.
And that plaque explicitly recognizes the rebels' strategic planning, their determination, and their significance. It's a crucial official step in breaking that historical silence.
The chief of interpretation at Virgin Islands National Park described the Aquamu as people who knew their own strength and were determined not to be kept in an undignified state. This modern push is about actively correcting what has been taught.
And filling those gaps with truth and nuance.
So this deep dive into the 1733 St. John insurrection offers a profound final takeaway for you, the listener. It reveals that enslaved people were not just seeking individual escape, they were engaged in strategic, high-stakes political conflict, constantly fighting for agency.
The Aquamo, thick with warriors and political intent, were revolutionary leaders who sought sovereignty. Their actions shattered the European delusion that black people were content in slavery. It proves that the colonial world was a constant battleground.
As one historian noted, the St. John insurrection stands as incontrovertible evidence that the idea of contentment in slavery was a toxic fantasy created solely by the oppressors.
And even in defeat, their collective suicide was a final political act, a refusal to surrender their humanity to the torturer's rack.
Their successful seizure and control of a colonial island, even for 9 months, demonstrates that the fight for liberation was never a question of if it would happen,
But always how and when the next attempt would be made.
a truly powerful, complex, and essential piece of history that deserves to be known in detail.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the history of St. John.